Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers that cover the NFL on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your host, Erin Summers.
Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. I'm Erin Summers. The Saints got back on the practice field Thursday after taking Christmas Day off, and since they were in Green Bay on Monday night, didn't get back into New Orleans until pretty late. Tuesday was also a light day, pretty much an off day for the players. A lot of them did come in, though, and got a lift in, did some rehab. Today, first official practice, then they will practice again on Friday and Saturday. They're going to cram a lot in over the next couple days. Here's interim head coach Darren Rizzi on how he's handling the prep for Sunday.
In a ways, we're kind of treating it like a little bit like a Thursday night game, if you will, because we got back early, however you want to say it, late early on New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve. I'm going to get my holidays mixed up. And so, obviously we have to have a player's day off. I just felt like some guys came in here and got a lift and treatment and all that stuff on Christmas Eve. Christmas Day was the day off. And then today was kind of a Wednesday install. Tomorrow will be a Thursday install. Saturday will be a combination Friday, Saturday. So from an install standpoint, we really just miss our situational stuff that we usually get on a Saturday. So it's kind of we're going to cram Friday and Saturday into kind of a joint deal. That's usually what we do when we play a Thursday game. So it's very, very similar to that short week. Traveling back, obviously, late at night and all that mixed in with the holiday, just felt like that was the right thing to do.
That game Sunday against the Raiders is the Saints' last home game of the season. Rizzi said it's really important to end things on a high note in front of the home crowd, and he emphasized the need to really focus in on playing well in all three phases of the game.
Yeah, listen, I just said when we broke the team down on the field, it's been a while since we've played a complete game, all three phases, kind of in sync. Everybody playing their peak performance. So, for our last game at home, that would be a great opportunity for us to do that. All three, regardless of who's playing, all three phases working together, playing in sync, playing complementary football. And it is our last. Our fans deserve to our fans have been great. I got to be honest with you, really, since I've taken over, the fan support has been phenomenal for me individually and our team. And it's always nice when you're playing at home to give back to the fans and give them one last, something good to watch and something good to look at, some exciting football, no doubt.
Lots of injury updates to get to today. Quarterback Derek Carr did not practice again. He has been out with that left hand injury since 2 games ago. It would be quarterback Spencer Rattler who gets the start Sunday if Carr is unable to go. Rattler took first-team reps today at practice, and that would be the same for the rest of practice this week. Center Eric McCoy and left guard Lucas Patrick, both absent from practice today, both likely out for the rest of the season. Not looking at surgeries, however, Rizzi did say that they're significant enough injuries that he doesn't anticipate to see them, definitely not Patrick and probably not McCoy, for the remainder of the year. On a similar note, running back Alvin Kamara did not practice today. He's rehabbing back from a groin injury. Rizzi said that while he is getting closer, he will likely not play this weekend against the Raiders, but there is potential for him to come back in that last game against the Bucs. Wide receiver Chris Olave was a full participant in practice today, coming back from that concussion. They've taken their time with this, as they should. He's definitely weighing his options, but it's been good for him to get back on the field. Rizzi said that he has been smiling. He's happy. He was able to go through practice today, and they're going to take things day to day with him. Have not made a decision on whether or not he will play this weekend. We'll continue to keep track of who is in and out of practice on Friday as we approach that game Sunday. It's a 12 o'clock kick on Fox. Adam Amin will be bringing you the action as play-by-play alongside Mark Sanchez and Christina Pink. Amin is my guest today. We broke down this upcoming matchup against the Raiders and talked a little bit about what's been going on in the NFL around the Christmas holiday and a fun story that hit the NFL news cycle today. Adam, thank you so much for joining me on the New Orleans Saints podcast. It is always awesome to have you, and you're going to be here in New Orleans calling this Saints-Raiders game this weekend. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, hope you had a great holiday. Hope you had a great Christmas, and we're excited to get down to the home of the Super Bowl. You'll probably hear us say that more than a handful of times on the Sunday broadcast.
Yeah, they're definitely getting ready for it. I mean, every day there's new stuff happening around the city, different events already. So it's going to be an exciting time come February. But right now, this game is what matters for the Saints, and in the Superdome, got to get a win because it's been a little tough for the Saints this season. What has surprised you the most about the nature of the Saints this year?
I think part of it has been obviously when you have injuries at quarterback, that's always going to derail something. Obviously, all five of the wins that the Saints have been when Derek has started the game. So obviously, when you have anything like that, that's going to be a problem. I know that Alvin has dealt with injuries this year. I felt like there was probably going to be a little bit more production with a little bit of focus. Taysom's been hurt. That obviously doesn't help. We saw New Orleans in the preseason, and I think there was a little bit more hope for what the offensive line was going to look like and perform as. I think there's been a little bit of, not I don't even think disappointment's the right word. I just think, we thought the trajectory would be a little bit quicker. The learning curve would be a little less steep, but not to say there hasn't been good moments for the O-line this year. And obviously with some young guys up front, that's been a big deal and a big talking
Mm-hmm.
point. And then I would say, after the really hot start in terms of takeaways, and I think when the Saints are at their best, and I think just traditionally when the Saints have been at their best, they've been a great takeaway team. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
probably another thing that's kind of stuck out over the course of the year.
It seems like both of these teams coming in on Sunday have dealt with injuries
Mhm.
at significant positions. I know the Raiders have had a lot of injuries to their defensive line, their quarterback, obviously. What stands out to you about Las Vegas this season?
I mean, when you lose Max Crosby for an extended period of time, that's going to hurt a lot. Christian Wilkins has been a big key
Mm-hmm.
loss for them this season. Um, they're another team, especially with Antonio Pierce, and he talked to us about this. He thought that they'd be a better takeaway team than they were. And I don't think they had their first like forced fumble of the year until a few weeks ago. They had a good game against Jacksonville last week. They finally were able to generate some takeaways, and some punch outs and things like that to make it a little bit easier. But all that being said, I think that was a major surprise. But again, when you lose Crosby for portions of the season, Wilkins has been out. They've dealt with injuries in the back end as well. They're very young. There's, I think,
Mm-hmm.
22, maybe it might be higher than that, first and second year players. So I think that's something that a lot of organizations can relate to at one point or another when you see just the youth movement that you're trying to kind of maybe rebuild a certain side of the ball or a particular side of the ball. A lot of those things have been the case. They haven't been a very good tackling team. They've gotten a little bit better in that regard, maybe in the last 2 or 3 weeks. They're much better in that regard against Jacksonville. And then, yeah, there hasn't really been stability at that position since Derek went over to New Orleans. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's obviously been a factor the last 2 seasons, whether it's been Minshew in there or O'Connell. They've had to turn to other starters. That's been a jumble over the course of the year this year. But O'Connell's their guy right now. He's played well. There's been some improvements there. So I think those are the kind of things that have encapsulated a season like this. They've lost a lot of heartbreak. I think similar to the Saints, they've lost heartbreakers and they've lost blowouts. Like
Mm-hmm.
they've seen losses in very different fashions. So there's just kind of speaks to the instability of both sides of the ball over the course of the season.
The Raiders snapping that 10-game losing streak this past weekend against Jacksonville. And Aiden O'Connell, he's had no interceptions in 3 out of the last 4 games. So he definitely seems like he's at least playing well, valuing the ball and not making mistakes as much. But with Derek Carr over here with the Saints, he's been out with the injury with the left hand. Obviously didn't play in the last game. There's been some from talk about him wanting to get back on the field. And I think that maybe a little more so because you're facing your old
Yep.
team. But that would be a fun storyline. I'm sure that the Fox broadcast would be all over that one.
That's probably one of the lead things that you talk about in a game like this. Again, we get to these final 2 weeks, and you and I were joking around a little bit. Like some weeks, this is the life of the regional NFL broadcaster. You have your Brady and Burkhart crew. That's your A crew. That's typically going to call like the biggest game of the week for Fox. Joe Davis and Greg Olson. I work on that crew for a month out of the year. Like you're going to call the next best game. And then it's kind of a crapshoot, from 3 to 6. And then this is a week where Netflix comes in, takes a couple of games. Saturday has the 3 games on NFL Network. So, the pickings become a little bit slimmer. So we go from a game last week where you had a matchup of 2 teams with 20 combined wins, Seattle, Minnesota. You
Mm-hmm.
don't really have to sell that game, right? There's not something, both these teams have playoff implications, division title hopes. That's an easy sell for a game. You come into this week, where 2 teams are out of the playoff race. what is sticking out to us? Because we
Yeah.
don't want to shortchange these teams or these coaches or these players or these cities who are still going to tune into these games. And they're probably thinking, fans of these two teams are thinking along the same lines as we are, like, hey, let's project a little bit forward. Certainly we can recap what's gone on this year, but we know the records, we know the numbers and statistics probably aren't going to be, sticking out other than individual marks that guys are gunning for. So what are storylines that stick out? That's how we on TV and I know you guys too kind of approach the week. Well, let's
Mhm.
focus on a couple of things that matter to us and matter to these individuals and matter to maybe the bigger picture of the organization going forward. I work for the Bulls as well on the NBA side. You work for the Pelicans. So you and I both have an understanding of what the local angle of a lot of these games is like. So we almost try to take a little bit more of a local angle and kind of see individual storylines, and Derek potentially playing. It's
Yeah.
good news for us as well because it is fun to see guys play against organizations that they have history with. And I don't think Derek is the type of guy that thinks his past is fraught, with the Raiders. It was a little up and down, but he had great success there. Obviously, some playoff runs, some unexpected playoff runs as well, and had them at levels of success they hadn't really seen since the turn of the century when the Raiders were going to the Super Bowl. So when we get opportunities to talk about things like that, we hope to expand on them and talk to the right people. So yeah, good news for us and obviously for Derek as well, that he's back on the mend and in what's been a really tough season, whether it's been the midsection or whether
Mhm.
it's been the shoulder that's always kind of nagged him, or whether it's been this hand issue the last couple of weeks. It's good to see Derek on the field. And like I said, I don't think he approaches this as like, God, I hate the Raiders. I got to beat them up. It's, hey, I am a prideful athlete, wants to show that I'm still capable of doing positive things going forward. And it happens to be against a team that I have a history with. I think any athlete worth their salt is at least thinking about that, approaching that with some vigor over the course of the week in mind.
Yeah, I mean, this is the last home game for the Saints this season, and I think that they want to leave a good taste in the fans' mouth of things here and where they're going in the future. But you want to leave on a high note in the dome. So I think that they'll be bringing it as much as they can, and that's something that can be said about the team throughout the season. Is there's still been the effort every single day. No one's given up, and even Antonio Pierce with the Raiders kind of touched on this on Monday in his press conference. He's like, we don't play these
Yep.
games to lose.
Yep.
Even though this is a situation where maybe the fans are hoping for draft picks, the teams are going to come out here and give it all they got.
I'll make one more NBA reference. The Bulls are kind of in a similar situation right now where they're in the middle of like, are you pivoting towards a rebuild or pivoting towards younger players? Are you tanking for what's a healthy draft class coming up? And Zach LaVine, the Bulls' highest paid player and one of their stars, said players and coaches don't tank. That's just as simple as that. Now, organizations can kind of put coaches and players maybe in the position with less resources or make moves. And that's kind of how an organization itself can maybe tank. But players and coaches aren't really of that mindset.
Mhm.
And especially when you do start to get away from the team wins and losses being as big of a factor, you start to focus on some individual performances. I'm not saying players are being selfish, but I do think players are thinking, well, I also need to put good film together for the next team. There's a lot of free agents. We just mentioned for Las Vegas how young they are. There's a lot of young players on rookie contracts
Yeah.
that still are looking to develop and want starting spots for a team that maybe is rebuilding, whether it's New Orleans or Las Vegas. They're going to want opportunities to show what they can do. It's always like kind of the last preseason game that you and I cover during August, where you've got guys fighting for the last roster spots. This is kind of the same circumstance right now for both of these teams. So we focus on a little bit of that as well. And guys don't tank. They can't afford to. I don't think
Mhm.
NFL players, other than the super rich ones, can afford to. And by the way, I think they got super rich because they're good players,
Yeah.
and they're good players because they put this process out onto their schedules every week and go through it and try to improve. So uh, I don't. We always have moments in these late season games, even if the playoffs aren't a factor. I just think the NFL is a sport that is conducive to players putting in great effort, regardless of the team records or the matchups that we get a chance to see. So we're always excited, to focus on those things a little bit more than maybe a game that has bigger playoff implications. We have to keep touching on the big picture. We get to focus in on some more of the minutia and some of the individual stuff over the course of the week because we're not expecting these players for these coaches to play in a matter that is fighting for a draft pick. Maybe in week 18, maybe in the last quarter, you're going to pull guys so guys don't get hurt, or,
Yeah.
Brock Bowers is going for all these rookie records, and tight end records for Las Vegas. He's gunning for that too, and the team wants that for him. So there's a lot of good stuff here, and I don't think we're going to lose sight of that, and we're certainly going to try not to lose sight of that on Sunday.
It's always wild to me when people are like, oh, the players aren't going to try anymore. They don't care. It's like they're throwing away a year of their career then, and there's nothing guaranteed. These players, they only have, I don't know, maybe 5 good years, like on average, or
short,
less.
man.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Short in this league. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Brock Bowers. He's had a great season though. They're definitely a bright spot for the Raiders.
Closing in on a Ditka record, closing in on the Vegas tight end or Vegas reception record, which happens to be held by another tight end in Darren Waller. And then closing in on the Puka Nacua record that we called last year. We did the Week 18 game when it was the Rams and the Niners. Both were fighting for seeding, but both teams knew that they were essentially going to be playoff teams. And Sean McVay was desperately trying to get Puka Nacua the record. He had a little bit further to go than Brock does with some of the marks that he's chasing, but he kept him in until like the third quarter. He got the record and then immediately pulled him. And it's like we're aware of these things. And Antonio Pierce, who again was a player himself and understands what that's like to achieve something that is an individual thing. Although when we spoke to him about it, he was so high in his praise for Brock Bowers, a guy who's obviously familiar with the region, being an SEC guy and having a lot of success at Georgia the last couple of seasons. He said he's used to winning teams, and that's always been his focus. The work that he puts in is always focused on improving the health of the team as a whole. So he's not used to a season like this where individual accolades are being showered upon him. He is very routined, very regimented, I should say, in his routine. He's a 5:45 a.m. guy, and I'm sure the Saints have guys like that too, that are 5:45 a.m. guys that are the first ones in, and they're already in the film room, or they're already getting wrapped up, and they're already getting some treatment before they got to go in and do their physical stuff. So he's one of those guys. And he said, I know every second of every day where Brock Bowers is going to be because he's so regimented. And I know he's going to be in before 6 a.m. He's going to be in the film room at this time, in the cafeteria at this time, in the weight room at this time. And he's successful because of those processes that he puts himself through. He's very much like a Max Crosby on the defensive side of the ball for Las Vegas. I'm sure you have a sense for those guys too on your side, like the guys who are early risers and come in, and Darren Rizzi knows every second of every day where this player is going to be, this player is going to be, and I think there's something to be said about players like that.
Yeah, well, Darren Rizzi really messed my schedule up because he changed practice times from what they were earlier in the year, and so I've had to adjust. It's been a little different with a new head coach, obviously interim head coach, and Darren Rizzi's brought a little bit of a spark, the first couple weeks that he was here. And I think that regardless of who is overseeing everything, as the head coaching or calling plays or whatever it is, the players are going to come in and fight through the end of the season. Alvin Kamara he needs 50 rushing yards to get to 1,000 yards for the first time in his season, and he's hurt right now. And so, even I want him to be able to play because I want him to get that record for the first time in his career, which is crazy because he's done it so many times total yards, but to have 1,000 yards rushing would be really cool for him. So you hope to see him on the field, whether it's this weekend or next weekend for an individual record. And those are the little things that you can still get out of the season and highlight as it goes on. With the NBA and NFL dual roles that you wear, who does Christmas Day belong to?
Christmas Day belongs to not turning on the TV other than to watch, like TV shows that you've missed out on. That was the Christmas this week, which was nice. For so long as a kid, the Christmas Day like triple header that NBC would put on was like the unofficial start of the season. Obviously, they'd played for a month plus, or now the schedule's even longer. It goes 2 months until Christmas starts, but that was always like the unofficial reset. And I was fortunate, when I worked at ESPN to have, a few Christmas Day games and to be a part of that. And there was something special that I was always excited for. Well, oftentimes we were the last game of the day, or I had the primetime ESPN game in Oklahoma City one year, and there was always something special. Even
Hmm.
getting the first day, game of the day out in Toronto, that was a special thing for us to get to start the Christmas Day and
Yeah.
kind of relaunch the NBA. Just in a short amount of time, the NFL has kind of stepped in and taken over, and to ABC's credit, they still put a great game in that primetime slot. It was perfect timing as soon as the NFL games were done. Well, oh, here you go. Now you got
Hmm.
Lakers and Warriors to watch, and you luck out with an excellent Christmas Day finish. So, the Curry three, and then Dalton Connect late. So, beg your pardon, Austin Reeves late. So, to have a day like that still has both sports featured is awesome, but it did not take long for the NFL to kind of step in and establish some dominance with some good AFC matchups yesterday. But for
Yeah.
me, it's I try to keep the middle of the week as clean as possible. I was fortunate to have a day off from the Bulls this week as well, so it's going to get right back in the thick of it for the next couple of weeks, and then when football's over, we settle into the NBA. And I know
Yeah.
you're looking forward to at least cutting the schedule down a little bit too.
A little bit. Yeah, it would help. I don't know. Netflix did it big yesterday. I think it's
Sure.
more the multiple streaming platforms getting in on stuff as well, wanting a piece of the pie. The other big storyline, at least today, was Teddy Bridgewater getting
Yeah.
back in the NFL. I love it. The fact that he goes out and wins the state championship and now he's on the Detroit Lions. Like, has there ever been a coached player that's won a state championship and then possibly a Super Bowl, right? Like, it would be such a wild story.
It'd be absolutely incredible, and I know the Monday night broadcast is probably going to highlight Teddy at some point. I mean, it's a great accomplishment, and you guys know this in New Orleans after he stepped in for Drew, just an
Mhm.
all time good person,
Yeah.
easy guy to root for. Came back from that horrible injury when he was in Minnesota, and I remember calling one of the games where he made his return, and just the humility and the perspective. He told us a great story. I still remember this. Talking about how we said how is it to feel like you're fearless, to go out there after you've come back from an injury. He goes, well, I took he went like cliff diving at some point and had to like muster up all this courage to go cliff diving. And once he did it, he was like, oh, I can pretty much do anything. I was like, really? That's got to turn it around for you. And it was just this cool story that he had, and obviously with even more years behind him, he's got even more wisdom, and he was always just a great, you know, thinker about things. Like he always just had like a big picture perspective on everything, and he was very thoughtful. So he became a very easy guy for us to root for. He had some great moments. He's had some great moments in
Mhm.
his career, and New Orleans being one of those spots where he had some really, really good moments. He will always be somebody that I root for just because of his demeanor as a person and because of the kind of bravery and courage he's shown on the field. I will forever be a Teddy Bridgewater fan.
Yeah, I think a lot of people around here would echo those
Yeah.
sentiments as well. He's always been a fun person to root for. What is this game going to come down to on Sunday? Circling back to the Saints and the Raiders.
I think if you can contain Bowers, I really feel like he's such a factor on the offensive end, and doing it against the defense in Jacksonville last week that has had some nice moments this year as well. And I think we can say the same thing about the Saints, especially early in the season with some of the wins that they put together. The performance they had against the Giants a few weeks ago for their last win. I think there have been some good defensive moments this season for New Orleans. So to be able to contain Bowers, I think is going to be factor number one. And can Kamara get the run game going a little bit and, kind of take advantage of the thin, you mentioned it earlier, Aaron, the kind of thin front with all the injuries that the Raiders have had, turning, 2 or 3 yard runs into, 6 or 7 yard runs and being able to possess the football, keep a Raiders offense that feels a little bit more confident after what we saw last week off the field. Most of these games, as I do this job further and further, we talk so much about third down,
Mhm.
and third down becomes a factor on one side or the other based on what you do on first and second down. So the domino effect of how these teams plan first and second down is always something that we got to keep an eye out for, because I think that dictates a lot of the games that we watch in the NFL, is just who's winning on first and second down when teams want to be a little bit more um, run savvy on the defensive end, run heavy on the offensive end. I'm always curious as to what those first two downs look like in any game.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. We hear a lot about third down play every week. It's kind of, it's harped on for sure. Don't ever want to get into those third and long situations. What's the weekend look like for you? Got any Bulls games before you head down here?
I'm actually off the Bulls until Monday, but I'll go straight from New Orleans to Charlotte on Sunday night. I'll call the Bulls and Hornets on Monday. We'll fly to DC after that. We'll do Wizards and Bulls on New Year's Day, where some weird things have happened. 2 years ago, DeMar DeRozan, or 3 years ago, I guess it is now, DeMar DeRozan hit the second of back-to-back buzzer beaters in DC, which was a fun moment. So we'll head back there and then come back home, one more NFL game, and then it's on to the NBA for the rest of the slate.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the time today. I'm glad you had a good holiday, and we'll see you here on Sunday.
Appreciate it, Erin. Always good to talk to you.
Appreciate Adam taking the time to talk to us about this upcoming matchup this weekend, and look forward to having him in the Superdome on Sunday. Always fun to see him around. Got to see them for our preseason matchup in San Francisco, and they've yet to call a game for us this year. So good to have those three on the call this second to last game of the season. Hope to see everybody out at the Dome. We'll have one more podcast Friday as we'll dive into the Raiders from their perspective, and then we will wrap things up as we head into the weekend for that Sunday game. As always, thanks for tuning in. You can find anything that you missed today on NewOrleansSaints.com.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast.